Quick update on the M3 convertible rear floor replacement that we're carrying out. So we've now cleaned off most of the seam sealer just to expose the damage, and we're looking into the boot at the moment. Here's the spare wheel well. Obviously it's looking dirty, but it is work in progress, so the car will be everything will be removed prior to any sort of further welding work that's carried on. Battery leads, loom and a couple more modules, and extensively cleaned before the car is repaired and goes out. You won't actually know that this has been done. It will be a very OEM finish, but yeah, we're just looking into the boot floor at the moment, and that big gap in front of us is the cavity or the hole where the rear axle carrier panel would have sat, which is now out of the car, and this is the convertible bulkhead section. So then we've got the edge of the boot floor here. This is the bit that had ripped away from the chassis legs, which you can see the damage here. You can see a couple of cracks where it's torn, and a little crack going down past that weld just down there. But this one has stopped just on the chassis leg straight piece, so not much damage there, but obviously it still needs to be brought back up into position and welded and reinforced. The left side was the problematic one on this one, because not only has it got internal damage just around, directly above the left rear subframe threaded receiver, which can't be repaired. We'll have to cut that section out and make a new, stronger piece there, but also it actually pulled itself off of the chassis leg, which is where you can see all those spot welds that have dropped all the way up to here, where the crack had started to come inbound and travel only a couple of centimetres, just started to come towards the centre of the boot floor. So yeah, this is where you can see the extent of the damage. So we're just going to be cleaning more items up now, and then going underneath to prop the boot floor up to bring it back up into its original position. Not only spot weld like it originally was, but we're going to be stitch welding inside from the boot floor to the chassis leg, and then also outside underneath the boot floor to the chassis leg on both sides. So this will be much stronger than factory. So we've repaired the boot floor partially so far. We're still work in progress, and we've basically brought this back up to its original section, made sure everything matches in the same lines, and we've stitch welded on top inside the boot, holding the boot floor to the chassis leg, and then from underneath as well, underneath the car, we've also stitch welded it and held the boot floor to the chassis leg. Still need to attend to that crack there, which we need to stop drill and then weld. Cut the sections out that were bad, which are obviously going to couldn't be reused. There's just nothing you can do with those, and it would look very messy. So a new section will be made for that area. We need to do the same on this side because we've got cracking which looks messy and we can't contain, so that will be cut out. And this section here, where these spot weld holes are, this is where the rear floor holds up to it, and the floor effectively is relying on this boot floor panel being strong so that it doesn't fall down. But unfortunately it's only a sheet metal boot floor which isn't terribly strong, so even before this video we'd planned to strengthen and reinforce this section by effectively adding in a central chassis leg, which will go something like that, which will be like a third central chassis leg, which not only the boot floor will be welded to, but then the rear axle carrier panel, when it goes into position, can also be welded to that. So it's just a central strengthening bar. This is the view from underneath, now that we've reinstated the boot floor panel back onto the chassis legs and stitch welded inside and outside, and repaired as best as possible an old fatigued floor, but we're quite confident with the stitches that have been done inside and outside. That's now repaired and held back onto the chassis leg. This side still needs to have that internal section cut out like that side so that we can prepare for a new patch. And this is also showing our new support bar, which is acting like a third central chassis leg, which is now cut to length, installed in place, tacked in, and the boot floor has been repositioned and held back up in a horizontal plane to this new central support bar, and spot welded in the factory number of spot welds that had originally popped. And interesting to note that in that rectangle section going across there, the part where we've spot welded it to the central piece, there's 10 spot welds, just 10 holding this on, and then in the other piece going in the same direction there's 9, and then you've got about 4 going down the left side and 4 down the right side, and that's the central rectangle section. So you can quite clearly see why the panel can pull away from the floor. It does have more spot welds around the perimeter, around the wheel arch section and around the front and the back, but it's not a huge amount, and once a few start going, obviously they just all start then having to do more work and load. So as well as spot welding this, we're going to stitch weld this panel up to the new piece, the strengthening support, just to give it more stability. Very quick update, we've stitch welded the front section of the boot floor panel to our new central support, central chassis leg, and taken those welds back flat as minimal as possible, just so that the new floor can sit up in place. So these are the 2 floor panels next to each other. Front one is obviously the old damaged one, and this is the new one that we're just prepping and making a map of, just to start the prep work. It's interesting to note that on this front left one, this is looking above the left rear subframe mount. That T section, upside down T, is the strengthening piece that you've seen on other videos where we used to, and other companies do, cut a section out of the middle and basically do a large rosette weld between those 3 rosette welds to strengthen it and to stop the mount tipping. But interestingly, in this case, that wouldn't have done anything, because the rosette welds are absolutely fine. There's no cracking around them or on them. The crack has actually started because the floor has just ripped itself, or that section is ripped down from the rest of the floor, so the crack has gone all the way around the side. So welding in the centre wouldn't have done anything. We used to do that years ago, but we changed the process now because we concentrate on this left rear area, which is where all the problems stem from. So that's just interesting to make a note of. And they've obviously done their homework, BMW, and stress modelled this floor and worked out that the left rear side does get more torsional stress, because there are 4 more spot welds on the left hand side section than there are on the right rear section. But even with those extra 4, it still isn't enough. The floor will start to lift, the spot welds will break, and the floor starts to drop off of the rest of the chassis. And that plastic type bag and that grey there is sealer, some sort of polyurethane sealer, probably like a car body sealer, that has been applied to the cracks from the boot floor when this floor was up in the car, in an attempt to hide the cracks, we believe. And then a fresh sound deadening pad has been placed back on top because the cover's still on. And what we intend to do to add to our strengthening process is not only do the perimeter spot welding and additional stitch welding, but where we've got a central chassis leg support bar in the rear now welded in place, which effectively lines up in this back section here. We intend to add more spot welds, move the position slightly so that the spot welds aren't holding this floor to the boot floor, they're now holding this floor to the chassis strengthening bar that we've installed. So we're moving them 2 centimeters inboard to connect onto that 3mm box section support, which is going to be much stronger than a 0.75mm stamped sheet boot floor. On the factory one, there's I think it's between 8 and 10 spot welds on this line here, holding it to the actual boot floor section. We're going to put 16 in, which is obviously additional, and we're also going to put 16 spot welds along this line here on this side, and then where this floor panel will touch the new strengthening piece, once the floor is in place, we're going to lean in from the boot section, and say the box section is, say, that wide, on this inner run here, which we can get to all the way along, we're going to stitch weld this floor to the new box section, which is like a third central chassis leg basically. So it just ties this floor ridiculously strong into the car, completely surpasses all strength that the old factory one has, and relies on just an average amount of spot welds. And I'm also going to MIG weld the convertible rear bulkhead structure, which is part of the chassis. Going to MIG weld that to the centre. That's only something that can be done on convertibles because they don't have it on a coupe. And then we're going to add additional spot welds in this front section here as well. Again, I think we worked out there's about 9 or 10, and we're going to try and get 16 in there as well, just to give it more strength. And the same with the sides, where the sides are spot welded in on the folded section. There's not a huge amount, not many at all. Sort of like in a 10-inch section on the left rear side, there's about 3 or 4 spot welds. So we're going to double up on that capacity, and as well as spot welds, we're going to stitch weld the floor to the chassis all around the outside of the lips. Sort of every 2 inches we're going to do a stitch weld, just to completely contain this floor.